Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Buckeye Weekly podcast. I am Tony Gerdeman, here as always with Tom Orr. Tom, how's it going?
Good. I was looking at your background, and for those of you listening to the podcast, this will do absolutely nothing for you. But I was looking at your background, looking at those a wall of TVs, going, "Why do I know that? Where does that look familiar?" It is the press box in Jerry World, but I suspect you're there more for the little cupcakes and wall of candy, and that's why this was such a memorable thing for you.
Yeah, just going through my photos, reminiscing. You see the wall of candy behind me. Got some sweets here. Over here, there are a bunch of cookies on my other side over here, where the nice young lady is. Always restocking that. So that's just looking back in my phone, just what makes me happy, and not the drive to Jerry World, clearly, but hopefully one day, Tom, we can again get back out on the road here in the next 9 months.
Dare to dream. Yeah, I think I have tremendous faith. We will be back out on the road this year yet again.
Yeah, and although
we say as if we weren't just at a game
exactly
a week and a half ago.
Gosh, remember so long ago when we used to travel to games. No, that will eventually happen again. But Tom, let's get to the show. Tuesday we talked about the guys on offense who were leaving or deciding to come back, making their announcements. So we put the defensive guys off for today, of which there aren't a lot of guys who made announcements one way or the other, but they are quite significant. And so what I'd like to do is just start on the defensive line and begin with Tommy Togiai, who announced that he was heading for the NFL. And I had written that my pre-story was he's coming back. Just, you got to write it one way or the other, unless you're going to write two of them. And I'm not going to write two of them. So I went with he's coming back. And of course, he announced he wasn't, so I had to change some wording and stuff in drafts, and then eventually put that. You weren't as surprised as me, but on a scale of 1 to 10, how devastating is this for Ohio State in 21 that he is not coming back?
It's pretty high. This is one of the higher ones because Justin Fields not coming back. Like, yes, they're really going to miss Justin Fields. He was great, but everyone knew he was going to go. Okay, I was more of a coin flip. I think there was an argument to come back. There's an argument to leave. He's someone where he was so good. He's someone I think people didn't quite appreciate how impactful he was in the middle of that defensive line. Where, a year ago, Devon Hamilton had this like otherworldly year, and I remember last summer saying, "You guys are not. You don't realize yet how big that was, how good he was, and how much they're going to miss him." And then Tommy Togiai was good enough that it was like, oh, it was pretty much the same. It was fine. So, okay, now you guys don't understand how much they're going to miss him, how impactful he was. So, yeah, I mean, we'll see. But he's someone who there was absolutely an argument for him to come back. And had he come back, if they got him and Haskell Garrett back in the middle of that defensive line, that sets that defense up so well for success. And they had other guys who come back, and we'll get to them in a minute. But, if they had somehow gotten Togiai back for another year, I mean, on the 1 to 10 scale of how devastating that was, I mean, that's like a 7 or an 8 in terms of impact. That's someone they're really going to miss next year who, could have potentially come back.
Yeah, I think there's an argument to be made that the team would rather have Tommy Togiai back than Chris Olave. Not that they're going to tell Chris Olave, please go away. We don't want you around here anymore. But in terms of contending for a national championship, the depth behind that person or the depth overall of that position, I think there's definitely an argument to be made that the team would be better off with Tommy Togiai than Chris Olave. And so you take away Tommy Togiai, and it's like, well, where do they turn? And as we're thinking about it, you don't include Antwuan Jackson because we assumed he was gone. And then he announced he's coming back, which will essentially be his 6th year. He was a 2016 signee at Auburn, stayed at Auburn for a year, then, of course, went to junior college, and now this will be his 4th year at Ohio State, which is pretty crazy. He announced he was returning, and automatically then, okay, now you've got Antwuan Jackson and Jerron Cage who can step in for Tommy Togiai, and that makes things easier. I don't know that they are good enough. I wonder if they are good enough to be, is this a championship front if one of those guys is your nose tackle. But if the defensive ends and you've got Haskell Garrett returning, we'll get to him in a second. I feels like that is good enough. Also, and yet they're not so good that they keep the young guys from rising, like a Ty Hamilton or Mike Hall or Tyleik Williams, one of these guys where they're not just going to squash all of the development of the younger guys because there is an opportunity. So on one hand, it's almost like, is it good enough? Are they good enough? On the other hand, it's like, well, they're not so good that they're going to suffocate some younger guys from bolstering this. So, Tom, is Antwuan Jackson and Jerron Cage, is that good enough for an Ohio State championship level defensive line?
Right now, are those guys good enough? I don't know. Could they be good enough with another year of development and a normal spring and a normal summer and normal workouts and all of that? Yeah, maybe. I mean, Antwuan Jackson has come a long way since he got to Ohio State in 2018. Jerron Cage has gone from complete non-factor to like actual contributor. If they can continue those, that stair step up, that curve up, then sure, they can. That has the possibility of being a championship level middle of the defensive line. I mean, that was their nose tackle spot against Alabama in the national championship game, and they didn't get run all over. They did a nice job in the running game. They didn't get a ton of pressure in the passing game, and that's the whole defensive line. But they, I think I don't think that you can say no, that's not good enough. I think that they might be in the realm of good enough already, and with another year of development, another year, and one of those younger guys steps up the way Tommy Togiai did in 2018, where, you just in 2019, where you don't need to do a ton. Like Tommy Togiai 2019 was behind BB Landers, was behind Devon Hamilton. They didn't need him to do a ton, but he could come in and play 10 snaps. And it was like, okay, that's fine. You can get away with that. You just need one of those guys, Tyleik Williams, Michael Hall, whoever, to do that. There is some depth there. There's some young depth there. Like that is not a position that's going to be one that is like a huge black hole, like a huge problem for them now.
I also wonder if it leads to more rushman packages where then you have like Haskell Garrett as a lone defensive tackle in there. And maybe they do some of that. Although then you're like, well, do you really want to do that when you've got all three new starting linebackers? And wouldn't you rather help those guys with as much beef up front, as much mass up front as possible to keep the linebackers clean? But then, they'll do some mixing and matching. So let's get back to then Haskell Garrett, who announced that he was going to come back. I believe he announced from Hawaii, which, never let a player go to Hawaii to announce if they're coming back because you may not get them back. That's my number one rule of thumb in anything is if somebody's going to go, somebody's thinking about coming back, don't let them go to Hawaii and make that decision. You make it here, sir. And then we'll see how things go. But on a scale of 1 to 10, his importance coming back grows with the departure of Tommy Togiai. Like, if you want one or the other coming back, you can make an argument if just in a vacuum, each of them, maybe Tommy Togiai is more important. But then once Tommy Togiai leaves, the Haskell Garrett importance, goes from like an 8 to a 12 on a scale of 1 to 10, don't you think?
Yeah, that's one of those things where you didn't need to get both of them back, but you kind of needed to get at least one of them back. And if you had gotten both of them back, that would have been, the absolute perfect best case scenario. You need veteran depth there. That's a spot where, again, we have talked about this a whole bunch, especially in the context of Michigan, in terms of like, if you don't have defensive tackles, that just ruins everything. You have to have good veteran defensive tackles. And one of the reasons that the 2020 Ohio State team was as good as it was and didn't have the issues that I thought I think we both thought they might have on defense, at least the specific issues we anticipated. They had some other ones, but the specific issues we anticipated was how much Haskell Garrett and Tommy Togiai stepped up in the middle of the defensive line. Like we came into the year thinking defensive tackles were kind of the big question mark. And then, and then you end up with like all-American performances. It's like, oh, okay, well, that was far better than expected. And no one ran on them all year. Like no one ran on them all year. And that's a tribute to especially the interior of that defensive line. And so, yeah, getting at least one of them back is huge. If they had lost Togiai and Haskell Garrett, you've got a lot of, there's a lot of question marks there. And there's, this is Ohio State. There's talent there. but it's not completely proven talent. Haskell Garrett at this point comes back as, Haskell Garrett will be one of the people that, as players are walking into Ohio Stadium, the ESPN cameras will be following Haskell Garrett next year, getting this shot of him walking in his suit into the stadium or whatever, because he's one of the big name players now. And to get him back, that's huge.
It is. And if they didn't get him back, then at least there's Taron Vincent behind him. And at this point, a year ago, Haskell Garrett was like what Taron Vincent is now. He was a guy in the rotation. You could count on him. But certainly when we were talking about the defensive line coming into this year, neither one of us, I'm going to assume, said anything about Haskell Garrett becoming an All-American. Now, many things happened this year to make that happen, not the least of which is you get shot in the face and then you live through that and you have this new lease on life and you have this new drive. I'm not suggesting Taron Vincent needs that, but there is an example of guys who, as a fourth-year guy, just emerge and become something. So maybe that happens with Taron Vincent as well. And then I'm wondering, well, if you're not so sure about Antwuan Jackson and Jerron Cage, and this is before Antwuan Jackson even came back, I'm wondering, can you go Haskell Garrett and Taron Vincent together, side by side? And I don't think there's any reason you can't. It's just which one of those guys will it be? But getting Jackson back, Garrett back, there feels like there's enough pieces and parts here to put it together. And we've seen guys move back and forth between three technique and nose tackle in the past. I remember Mike Bennett and Adolphus Washington switching like mid-season almost because it wasn't working out for Washington. And so you just figure out what you have and you go from there. And I just things could be much worse without Jackson and Haskell Garrett back, because the numbers, you're talking about young guys and guys that haven't necessarily panned out in terms of, we don't know what we're getting with what they're getting with Jaden McKenzie at all. Where is he in all of this? And now you've got, I know they really liked Ty Hamilton initially in the spring and early in camp, but then not in the spring, but early in camp. And then, we never really saw him. And of course he's an undersized freshman. Now he'll be a better sized redshirt freshman coming into this year. And Mike Hall, Malik Williams, perhaps JT Tuamaloau, who can be, I know he wants to play defensive end, but maybe can be talked into, well, we like you inside as a rushman, like Draymond Jones type of thing, assuming that he ends up signing with Ohio State sometime in like April. But there are at least more options now, and that's half the battle right now.
Right. Well, what they've done is they've gotten to the point now where they don't have to hit the transfer portal to add someone else. Like if you do, and you build some depth there, that's great. But it's not a crisis right now. It's a crisis-opportunity, as they say. Do
they say that?
Well, I think some people say that. It is more manageable now. Like there's the floor for the ceiling is now higher than it would have been otherwise. I think that one of the questions with Taron Vincent is he has not been healthy for quite a while. He came into this season, he missed all of last season with a shoulder injury. That was still lingering going into fall camp. We didn't know exactly when we were going to see him. I'm not 100% sold on the fact that we saw a fully healthy Taron Vincent at any point this year. So if he is healthy, this is someone who was the number one defensive tackle in his class, 5-star player when he came in. And he in his true freshman season, he had a sack in the Big Ten championship game against Northwestern. Like he was on the field as a true freshman in the Big Ten championship game, making plays. Like it's in there. I don't think we've seen a healthy Taron Vincent probably since basically that game. So what are you going to get out of him next year if he has a healthy year? We saw the difference between a not completely healed up, totally healthy Thayer Munford in 2019 versus Thayer Munford had a full camp, a full year. He's got to do all the offseason strength work, all of that. Now you saw what Thayer Munford looked like last year. I think you might have something like that coming with Taron Vincent, but we haven't seen it yet, and gotta stay healthy.
Yeah, for sure. Let's move to Tyreek Smith, defensive end. Announced, not a surprise at all for either of us, I don't think. Had 1 tackle for loss, 1 sack this year. Created some pressure. Was one of the I guess national leaders or Big Ten leaders in creating pressure, but it leads to just 1 statistic, 1 sack. But still, he's a guy that was getting better and better, and a guy that they could count on. And the fact that they did not have him for Alabama, that was a significant loss. Going into that game, you're thinking, that's one of the guys. At that point, he may have been their second or third, fourth best defensive lineman, second best defensive end behind Jonathan Cooper, maybe the first best, maybe the best at that point. And so losing him was certainly significant. But now that he comes back, and you've got Zach Harrison, Javonte Jean-Baptiste, Tyler Friday, Noah Potter, Jack Sawyer, you've got more options again. But he still needs to Tyreek Smith still needs to put it together. I don't know what the expectations are for him, and we can get into this many times in the offseason. But he's a guy that you need like 6.5, 7 sacks out of that guy or something like that, or else, because for as effective as he can be, it's better to sack the quarterback than just to be close to him and moving him out of the pocket. At some point, it would be good for the Buckeyes to get results out of this guy.
Yeah, I mean, yes, that is true. Pass rush guru Tony Gerdeman. Yes, it's better to sack the quarterback. Yes, but he's someone who I think was coming on pretty strong at the end of the year. He was, you go back to the Clemson game, they had no Zach Harrison. You're a little shorthanded defensive end. He was one of those people, like Jonathan Cooper got pretty consistent pressure. Tommy Togiai got pretty consistent pressure. But he was one of those people who Tyreek Smith was in there a bunch of times getting pressure on Trevor Lawrence. And, again, you don't have to have a sack to force, to force a turnover or to force an incompletion or get the other offense off the field. And he's someone who you have seen that progression, the same progression we talked about with Antwuan Jackson and Jerron Cage, where it's like, okay, sort of a little bit, you're sort of seeing a little bit, okay, now you're seeing it more. You get one more year, another year bigger, another year older, another year stronger. You have the opportunity to have him take that next step to be the 4, 5, 6 sack guy that they do need him to be, because you're not going to have, I don't think you've got a Chase Young on next year's team. I don't think you're going to have a 14, 15 sack season out of anyone. So you're going to need to have 3 or 4 guys who are at that 3, 4, 5, 6 sack level. And they have the personnel to do it. Tyreek Smith, Zach Harrison, Tyler Friday, Javonte Jean-Baptiste, you're bringing in Jack Sawyer. I mean, you have a ton of depth there. You got a lot of options there. You don't need any of them to be super duper stars. You just need all of them to be productive. And this far into his career now, I think he has the opportunity to actually do that.
I can very easily see him being the best defensive end on the roster next year. I know seems like Zach Harrison's expectations took a hit this year. And, again, I've said many times, I don't know how much stock we can put into this year for judging anybody. And of course, I say that when we talk about Jim Harbaugh mostly, but it's not a great year for handing down judgments on the future of anybody. But I do feel like Tyreek Smith is so close at times that it wouldn't take much for him to put it all together and become certainly an all Big Ten player next season as he continues to execute more. And I'm not talking in a grim way. I'm just talking about making plays. Baron Browning announced his return, his departure, sorry. Didn't mean to scare everybody. His departure. None of the linebackers at this point look like they're coming back. And in terms of Justin Hilliard, we know he's already said no. Baron Browning has departed. Nobody is expecting Tuff Borland or Pete Werner to surprise us and make their announcement by March 1st that they are foregoing the draft and entering back into Ohio State. So Ohio State will lose their top 4 linebackers. And this is also one of those things that we're going to be able to talk about for many months, because there are so many options that they can go in and then and just in terms of replacing the Mike, the Will, and the Sam, and then you get into, well, what about where does Craig Young, where does Court Williams, where do these guys fit in? What about is Josh Proctor a bullet or a safety? And hey, is there a bullet again in this defense? And so there are many options to for Ohio State to go into and for us to talk about down the road. But the reason I'm bringing up the linebackers is because USC linebacker Palaie Gaoteote is in the transfer portal and is very close with Haskell Garrett. Was almost going to be a Buckeye at one point. Was five-star All-American linebacker out of Bishop Gorman. There's been some rumors that maybe would he be looking at Ohio State, and I know his entire career, his 3 years, have been beset with injuries. But Tom, didn't Justin Hilliard, like most of his early careers, like first 3 years, weren't they also beset with injuries? So I know people have already written off Gaoteote as a possibility, or why would you even want him because of all of the injuries? But I think Justin Hilliard is a pretty good example that maybe don't write off somebody who has been productive when they've been healthy. They just have had issues being healthy.
Well, I mean, if they do add him, then first of all, we're both going to have to get better at pronouncing his name. I searched his name last night, and it was like his last name starts with a G. Why does the pronunciation start with an N? That's not how letters work. But yes, so he is someone who, in a year with no scholarship restrictions, like next year is going to be, what's the downside? If he comes and he's hurt or he's not able to play too much, then okay. If he comes and he is ready to play, I mean, he, as you said, he was someone who was seriously considering Ohio State and went to Bishop Gorman with, you mentioned Haskell Garrett. You didn't mention Tate Martell. He also played high school ball with Tate Martell.
I left that for you.
You did that. And boy, you look at that team, you got him, you got Haskell Garrett, you got Tate Martell, you got Bubba Bolden. It's like, yeah, I can see why they didn't lose any games to other high school teams. Yes, I can see that. But no, he's someone who, if you bring him in and he has some kind of role in the team, great. He missed most of last season with a concussion issue at USC. So you don't really know what you're getting, but I don't really see a downside if they wanted to bring him in. They do have, I mean, this group of incredibly talented linebackers that they brought in seemingly like 65 years ago, Kayvon Pope and Taraja Mitchell and Dallas Gant and those guys, like they're finally able to get on the field. They're finally, not behind the same group of guys they've been since day one. I know they love Craig Young. Craig Young's another guy who I think could be a real impact player there. Tommy Eichenberg, you hear that people talk up Tommy Eichenberg. I mean, that is a very talented linebacker room, but what's the harm? Why would they not bring him in? So, and you can use guys in certain spots, and there's going to be certain guys who, Tough Borland is a great middle linebacker for when you're playing Wisconsin, and they're going to run power up the A gap. Tough Borland is not a great linebacker. Write this down. Tough Borland is not a great linebacker for covering speedy guys out in space. Write that down. That's it. Tony's rubbing his face. That means I made a good point. Too soon? Yeah.
Too soon, Tom.
So yes. So you've got guys who may fit different roles. You may have guys who are not, 80 snap a game, 60 snap a game guys on defense, but you may have roles for guys. So yeah, I would say if they could add him, if they could bring him in, I see literally zero downside to doing that.
And as Tom said, he can cover Devontae Smith.
Don't think that's exactly what I said.
Well, that's what I got from it. Speaking of covering Devontae Smith, or as Tom said, not exactly, but Shaun Wade leaving, and Shaun Wade did a very good job when tasked with covering Devontae Smith. Aside from like one or two plays, which is what happens for any corner, he's gone. No surprise. The thing where it's like, yeah, it would be great to have him back, but next year they are more well suited to lose a guy like him than they would have been this year. And you saw how ill-suited they were this year by losing Damon Arnett and Jeff Okudah, and you saw the struggles with the entire secondary because of that. Next year they are better suited to handle this loss, because you do have Sevyn Banks and Cam Brown. I expect them to both continue. It's unfortunate Cam Brown obviously got injured and wasn't able to just be able to use this and grow, use this experience and grow from it, like I believe Seven Banks will. But you've also got Ryan Watts and Legend Cavazos and wherever Cameron Martinez ends up, and so many more options that you didn't have this year because, yeah, maybe those guys were on the team, but clearly they weren't going to turn to them in terms of the corners. But I also think that, Tom, maybe these 2021 guys, some of those guys could be ready to step in, maybe not outside, but we saw Alabama with, I believe, a true freshman in the nickel. We've seen Notre Dame, a true freshman starting cornerback this year. So it's not something that eliminates you from being a championship contender. And if they want to keep Cameron Brown inside, and again, one of these things we'll talk about for months, but the options here for next year, despite the loss of Shaun Wade, are much greater than what they were faced with this year.
Yeah, there's not nearly enough answers there yet.
Yeah,
but there's a lot more potential answers than there were by about game 3 of this season. Because this year, the answers were Shaun Wade and Marcus Williamson and Seven Banks. And then, I don't know, Josh Proctor and Marcus Hooker at the safety. And it was like, when they went nickel, it was like, here are literally the 5 players we trust to be on the field. On the entire Ohio State campus, there are 5 defensive backs we trust to be on the field. Here they are. What happens when we have to go dime? Oh, don't do that. We don't have an option there. And you had Lathan Ransom develop later in the year to the point where they could trust him. But you have with Ryan Watts, with Legend Cavazos, with the 6 defensive backs they're bringing in this year. I mean, you're going to have someone who develops. That's just, I don't know who it is. This is a little bit of like a lottery ticket thing. Like you just, I don't know which ticket is going to win. If you have enough tickets, like something's going to win, like something's going to hit there. So, and with Cavazos, I mean, Cavazos has the athleticism. Watts is someone you saw on the field a little bit earlier in the year. I think you saw Watts a little bit against Rutgers and Nebraska early in the year, where, he had shown them enough that they were willing to give him a little bit of run there. With a full spring, with a normal summer, like the second year is when you're used to being able to get someone out there and have them at least contribute. Like, we can have the Marshawn Lattimore conversation again. Like, do not write someone off if they are not fantastic as a sophomore, but you're probably going to have guys who are playable as sophomores. You're going to have Seven Banks. You're going to have Cam Brown, and how 100% is Cam Brown after the Achilles injury, we don't know yet. That's kind of one of the big open questions this year. You're going to have Marcus Williamson. You've got some options, though, and that's kind of the biggest thing at corner is I don't know what the answers are, but they already have a lot more options, and you have the opportunity to potentially bring in 1 or 2 guys in the transfer portal and really give yourself some more, maybe some more veteran depth to play with. That would be huge. And I would be very, very surprised if they did not bring in at least 1 or 2 corners in that transfer portal this offseason.
Yeah, and right now it's not like the names are outstanding in the portal, but I'm sure Ohio State is checking it every day. Mark Pantoni said like 2 years ago they would probably have like just a full-time guy just eventually just refresh
F5
exactly.
F5.
And hopefully the sorting function has gotten better than it was in the early days. But yeah, I mean, you've got to figure out exactly what you're going to do there, and I'm sure they really like who they have. But if you can add somebody that is experienced, has started 25 games or something like that, yeah, you do it. And does it upset the culture or the mood in the locker room? Well, I mean, the running backs were okay this year. The quarterbacks were okay the year before. You bring in Trey Sermon, you bring in Justin Fields. These things are, as Urban Meyer says, welcome to life in a big city. And I don't even know how you can't feel comfortable anyway when you're a guy and they're bringing in 5-star guys behind you every year, regardless. And almost it's like in recruiting, a coach's purpose is to recruit somebody better than you, no matter who you are. That's always the goal. God, can't wait till I get somebody better than stinking Justin Fields. Get him out of here and get somebody better in there. That's like the job constantly moving is to try to find somebody better than you are. And if it comes from the portal, it comes from the portal. If it comes from recruiting class, that's where it comes from. But definitely more options, more possibilities, probably some better answers because there's more multiple choices, and the choices might actually have the answer. Because the multiple choices this past season didn't always have the right answer in it, which makes this made a very cruel test at times, where it's like, which of these is this? And you're like, I don't think any of those are. Can I? And then there's no all of the above or none of the above.
There were definitely some none of the above moments on the Ohio State defense this fall. And yeah, if there's better options, I don't think we've even mentioned Tyreek Johnson. I mean, Tyreek Johnson is back for his, fourth year, right? So, you've got, you have guys, and between the guys they have and the guy you could bring in from the portal, and I wouldn't rule it out that they could bring in two guys to the portal, because this is going to be a very attractive destination for people. You have there. This is the very rare overlap between, you can compete for not just a conference but a national title here. Almost guaranteed you're going to be at least in the national conversation going into the end of the year. That's almost a given at Ohio State every year. There's that, but there's also, there's actually a pretty clear path to the playing field. You're not trying to crack the 2011 Alabama defensive backfield. Like, it's not, this is not there's both a path to the playing field and also a path to the college football playoff that are both pretty clear for you. So I would think this would be a pretty appealing spot for someone who's a, Power 5 starter at a team that goes 7-5 every year and just wants to go do something, whatever the Jonah Jackson equivalent of the cornerback market is this year. Like, someone who's been on a so-so to lousy team, but has been a really good player for a number of years. That guy, go find your cornerback version of Jonah Jackson this year, and that makes a huge difference. Because, I mean, that was the year when Ohio State was kind of in a little bit of dire straits in terms of offensive line depth, and Jonah Jackson just came in and was just like, immediately all Big Ten, and got them to, that was the Rose Bowl year, right? 2 years ago? No, 2 years ago. That was the
I don't follow the team.
That was the Fiesta Bowl year.
Yes.
All these years are starting to blend together. That was the Fiesta Bowl year. So you went from Rutgers to winning the Big Ten and going to the college football playoff and starting and then getting drafted in the NFL. Like, that's going to be an attractive option for whoever the cornerback version of Jonah Jackson is. That's
an interesting picture, Tom. The Jonah Jackson version of cornerback. I would call that guy a strong safety personally.
You're going to play a lot of press man with that dude. Good luck getting around him at the line.
So I think that'll do it, Tom. You got anything else?
Do we want to talk about safeties in more detail? Otherwise, I mean, there really wasn't anyone who left.
Yeah, exactly. So we'll save that for like April or June.
And August. March, May, June, and August are safety shows. Can't wait.
Yeah, so I think that'll do it then, because that's all. We just want to touch on who's left and how do you replace them, and not go into so much detail that we end up repeating ourselves 15 times between now and the next time we actually do the show. So I think that will do it then. Thank you all for listening. Thank you for watching. Make sure to check out BuckeyeScoop.com, where though it is the off season, it is still very much a season. There's plenty going on. The transfer portal, as we mentioned, is still hot and heavy, and rumors are popping up all over the place. If you'd like to be up on those rumors, check out the Ask the Insiders board, become a member. I promise you will like it. Tom, who is on the Morning Scoop tomorrow?
I can tell you who was on the Morning Scoop today. That was Alex Bleitman. That was we talked to Alex about two guys who I think Ohio State fans had pretty much written off in the recruiting game. A top 50 linebacker, Rayshawn Davis, for 2021. 5-star cornerback Will Johnson for 2022. All of a sudden, both of those are looking a lot more scarlet and gray than they were not all that long ago. So a couple of very interesting recruitments to watch on the defensive side of the ball, where Ohio State could probably use a little additional talent. So that was our Thursday morning show. Friday morning, well, friends, it'll just be an exciting mystery for all of us, won't it?
I can't wait. I'm looking forward to it. So thank you again, you guys, for listening, and we will talk to you guys next week.